Good morning, everyone. We are up to Perek Gimel, Mishna Tes, Chapter 3, Mishna 9. Gevin Shinatua B'Chatzer. Now, the previous Mishnah we discussed what happens when figs grow in a courtyard. And the Mishnah previously said that in that situation where the fig tree is in the courtyard, and as you're standing in the courtyard, you want to pick off the figs to be able to eat them, you have to take them one at a time. Pick one off, eat, pick one off, eat. Once you put two together, then the Chatzar would be Kaveya, Lamaser, it would set the full obligation, Shumas and Maisris, and you would not even be able to snack until you separate them. Now the Mishnah is going to discuss what happens by other types of produce. Gevin Shitu Natua B'Chatzar. Let's say you have a grapevine that is planted in a courtyard. Noidel Eskol HaEshkol. You can take the entire cluster, meaning you can pick off a cluster and eat and snack from that. The same thing applies to a pomegranate. You take off the pomegranate, the whole pomegranate, you then break open the pomegranate and snack on it. The same thing applies to a melon. By a melon, when you take the whole melon, you can take a whole melon and then eat from the melon, snack from the melon as much as you want, without separating Shumas and Maisris. The words Rebbe Tarfon. So what's happening is like this. The question is that when, let's say you're dealing with a cluster of grapes is individual grapes. They are individual grapes that are typically plucked off one at a time and eaten that way, or dealt with. If they're eaten, that's how they're eaten. Same with a pomegranate. You open it up and you eat seed by seed. A melon, although it's one unit, it's too big to eat at one time, so you slice it into pieces typically to eat it. And therefore, it would be possible to be considered that so the question is, when you take any of these things, do we see it as one unit or as more than one unit? If it's one unit, then it's similar to the fig tree. You're taking one at a time, and you snack one at a time. If it's not considered one unit, it's considered different things, different units, so then you've taken more than one together. And then you can't snack until you separate Shumas and Maisris like we have by the figs. So Tarfon says that although we're talking about here where we're talking about things that are made of many different things, or we can consider it made of different slices in the case of the melon, and that's the way that these things are consumed. They are consumed, each one by itself. Nonetheless, Tarfon says, I look at the cluster and the pomegranate and the melon as one unit. And therefore, I can pick one and snack on it without separating Shumas and Maisris. If I pick two, it's a different story. But if I'm just picking one, although that one consists of many different units, nonetheless, it's considered one, and you can snack on it without separating Shumas and Maisris. Rabbi Kiva says, no. Megargo b'shkailis, if we're talking about clusters of grapes, you got to do one grape at a time. Upirate b'rimain, you got to do one pomegranate seed at a time. Meaning you got to pick one, eat. And this is all happening while it's still connected to the tree. Well, I'm sorry. According to Rabbi Kiva, this is all happening while it's still connected. Because if you detach the cluster or pomegranate, that means you've taken more than one unit at a time together. To be considered one at a time by any of these things, it means while it's still connected to the vine, you pull up one grape at a time, one grape eat. If we're talking about a pomegranate while it's still connected to the tree, one pomegranate seed and then another pomegranate seed, and the sefer sarotiach, and you slice up the melon while the melon is still attached to the ground, you slice it. That's like, and then you eat, slice and eat. In all these examples, this is considered that you're doing one at a time, not combining two together. Now, if you recall, we had a previous Mishnah, Perek Beis, Mishnah Vav, where we were talking about purchases being kaveya, lemaiser. Purchases, sending something to the Shumas and Maisris obligation. That even though you didn't take it into your house, but if you were purchasing it from someone, that alone, again, if it's processed, if it's completely processed, that itself would be able to set the obligation for Shumas and Maisris so that you can't snack. And the case there was that when you were buying, when you were choosing, you told the person, give a person X amount of money to choose different clusters of grapes, that there you're requiring it as you pluck it off, as you detach it, as you pluck it. And there, the Mishnah said that if you're going to snack on those grapes that you purchased but didn't choose yet, when you do that, if you want to snack on it, you got to do it one at a time. You can't pluck off a cluster. If you pluck off a cluster, that's like taking more than one unit at a time. As we've been explaining until now, when you take off more than one at a time, the sages consider that like a small pile. And once it's a pile, it's processed enough. It's processed enough to say that something will be kaveh l'maiser other than taking it into your house. And in the case of the Mishnah over there in Perek Beis, in the second chapter, it's talking about purchasing. Now over there, we don't see Reb Tarfon saying that you could actually, when you're purchasing the clusters, you could take off a whole cluster and snack from it. It doesn't say that there. Over there, all it says is you take one grape at a time. While it's attached to the vine, you take one grape at a time. Reb Tarfon there doesn't say you can take off a whole cluster. And so there's a difference that has to be made. And the commentaries explained, brought down here in the notes, that the concept is that purchasing, I'm going to read it to you the way they say it. This is because selling has a greater power to set the ma'aser obligation than being brought into the courtyard. Selling has a greater power of setting the truma and ma'aser obligation than being into a courtyard. And since it is the greater power of setting for truma and ma'aser, so therefore, even Rebbe Tarfon would agree and say, no, over there, we're talking about purchasing. Were you to take a cluster, we would look at it as a pile, and therefore we kaveh l'maiser, and you couldn't snack on it until separate shumas and maiseris. But here, where the case is a chutzner, it's a courtyard, that's what's going to be kaveh l'maiser. In that situation where it doesn't have that same power of doing so as purchasing does, there Rebbe Tarfon says we can be lenient and considered a cluster as one unit, and you can snack on it without separating shumas and maiseris. Now the Mishnah continues discussing an example of something else in a courtyard, and that we have to treat it the same as the previous examples, and that is kuzbar. Kuzbar, they translate as coriander. Shizruah b'chatzar, that's planted in a courtyard. Mekartim ola ela v'eichal. You pick off one leaf at a time and eat. Now, coriander is primarily planted for its seeds. And typically the coriander leaves, you don't have to separate shumas and maises from them because it's not planted for that. Our Mishnah talking about specifically, you did plant it for that also. You intend to use the leaves, and you're planting it for the leaves, and therefore the leaves would be are now fit for it to have shumas and maises separated from them. And if you're going to process them and do gemar malacha, and let's say bring it into your house, that would create an obligation of shumas and maises. Now here, the situation is where it's growing in a courtyard, and you have these leaves that are, that are fit to have shumas and maises from them, and you want to eat them. So the Mishnah says the same before by the grapes. Got to do one at a time. You got to do one leaf at a time. If you take two leaves at a time, the sages consider that a pile. The courtyard is going to be kaveh l'maiser, and you're not going to be able to snack and separate shumas and maiseris. But when you do one leaf at a time, then it's okay. And that's what the Mishnah means when it says, Kuzbar shibitzri of a chatzar, the coriander that's planted in a courtyard. Mekartim ola ola, you cut off one leaf at a time, cut off a leaf, eat, cut off a leaf and eat, v'oichal and eat, without having to separate shumas and maiseris. But if you combine two together before you ate, chayiv, then you're going to have to separate shumas and maiseris before you can even snack from them. And the commentaries say that although the coriander leaves are not, again, they're not the main part of the plant. It's not like you're not dealing with the seeds here. They're not the main part of the plant. So again, your intention is to use them, and therefore the obligation of shumas and maiseris would come upon them. The Mishnah is teaching us that this law that the sages instituted, that taking two at a time is considered a pile, even applies by the coriander leaves, although they are not the main part of the plant. Even though they're really a insignificant part of the plant, still the sages applied this law that they instituted, that two of them is a pile. although they're not very significant, still we consider two of them as a pile. And if you did have two of them together, you will not be able to snack on them unless you separate Shumas and Maasros from them. The last part of the Mishnah deals with just a law of the obligation of Shumas and Maasros from certain plants that grow in a courtyard. And they are Hasiya v'ha'ezai v'ha'kurnish v'chatzer. They translate this as savory, hyssop, and oregano growing in a courtyard. Now, these things typically grow in a courtyard. They grow wild. And if something grows wild, so that we had in the first Mishnah in Mesachas Maasros, that if something is growing wild and you don't care about it, you're not watching it or guarding it from other people taking it, then there's no obligation of Shumas and Maasros from it. So these things that grow in the courtyard, these plants that grow in the courtyard are typically, they grow wild and very often the owner doesn't bother with it, just doesn't care about it, which would really mean that therefore they don't have an obligation of Shumas and Maasros. So the Mishnah says but if the owner is guarding them and he wants them for himself, then they will be liable for the obligation of Shumas and Maasros. So if they're not going to be guarded, they're like anything else that is not guarded, that doesn't have Shumas and Maasros. But if they are guarded, then the halacha is they will have the obligation of Shumas and Maasros, and they would have to probably follow. I don't know how they would follow it. I don't know what these things look like exactly to know. I don't know if this whole question of one at a time and two at a time is applicable to them. If we're talking about an oregano plant, probably if you take one plant at a time, one leaf at a time, however they grow, it'll be okay to snack on. Two at a time would be a pile. It would seem that it's going to follow all the laws that we had before. But the point of the Mishnah itself is really to tell us that these things that are growing, that typically grow wild in a courtyard, if they will be guarded by the owner, they will be liable. They will have the obligation of Shumas and Maasros to them. The fifth positive commandment, that one is it's possible to disobey when speaking Lashon Harah, is the following. There are times when you're listening, hearing Lashon Harah. It's also possible there'll be times that you will transgress the positive commandment of rebuking someone, meaning stopping someone from sinning. You see someone's about to start speaking bad about someone. Guy says, hey, did you hear about so-and-so? Right, so you already know where this is going. Now he knows that if he tells this person to stop, the person is going to listen to him. Excuse me. Even if you're not sure, you have a doubt, maybe he will. He is obligated to rebuke him so that he does not finish or complete or do his sin. So if you let him finish talking, you for sure are going to be disobeying this positive commandment of rebuking someone who's doing something wrong when you could have stopped him and you didn't. Now, Chavetz Chaim adds, now let's say you say, you know what, I'll let him finish and then I'll rebuke him. That's not that's against Jewish law. And here the Chavetz Chaim says something very interesting, very, 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 very Chavetz Chaim like, but really powerful. How is it possible that if, let's say, you'd see a person, Jewish person, eating pork, this is someone you can rebuke. So what are you going to say? Let him finish and then I'll rebuke him. If you got to stop him right away. Perhaps he'll stop. Every volume of an olive of the pork that he eats, he's transgressing another sin. So of course you're not going to let him finish. If so, in our situation of speaking, when someone speaks Lashon, it should be the same thing. Every statement, every derogatory statement being made is a sin, is another sin. And therefore, how can you say, I'll let him finish? Unless if you see that by allowing him to finish talking, meaning this guy is doing it in front of a lot of people, right? Now he's telling the story. So you can stop him. Meaning you could have started and you're going to stop him. He may have gotten in a few words and people heard what he said. And now you figure, you surmise that if you let him finish telling his story, you'll then be able to show other people how it makes no sense what he's saying. So allowing him to finish, you're actually protecting the other person's reputation. Right. You're able to show other people that it's not true. Then there are times where somebody's going to come over and to tell you something that you know is negative, but you actually are supposed to listen to it in order to protect yourself. Those would be situations where you don't have to. We don't say, "Oh, you're obligated to stop him." But if it's clear that he's just trying to start up with his friend, he's just trying to make fun of him. Whoever is quick to deliver the rebuke and stop his friend from doing this, mitzvah Abu he's doing a great mitzvah. This applies even if there are other people listening. Meaning, you may say, "Why am I obligated? There's a bunch of other people also. They could be doing it also. Why do I have to do it? Let them do it." No, you can't do that. When the Torah gives you the obligation to rebuke a person from doing a sin, to stop us from doing a sin, it's your obligation. No matter how many other people are there, you have the obligation. And therefore, if you're hearing a person speaking Lashon Harah, there is this obligation. Whereas the Chavetz Chaim says, or it's possible that your words will have effect. You have an obligation to rebuke him, to stop him. And if you don't do so, you have disobeyed the positive commandment, the B'cheach Techiach, which is rebuke your friend to stop a person from doing a sin. Have a great day.